Welcome to For the Record. I'm Kelly Sasso. This morning, we're taking a look at a topic with both physical and emotional impact that isn't talked about so much: infertility. For many, it can feel like an isolating experience, and many suffer in silence. So we wanted to not only look at the causes and the options, but also the support that's out there. Infertility is a medical condition that goes beyond biology. We sit down with the Vice Chairman of Reproductive Sciences with UPMC to talk about some of the options to be proactive, including IVF.
If there is the scenario of, well, I don't have a male partner right now, a woman should consider freezing her eggs. Eggs freeze real well, and when she's ready to get pregnant, well, then she has the eggs where the clock has stopped at the age they were frozen.
Plus, bringing those dealing with infertility out of the shadows and into a community.
One of our missions with Connected Nest is to really provide these supports that help to bridge the gap between nothing and clinical spaces, and to really bring people together in these community spaces.
The local group giving them a family to lean on through the uncertainty.
You really find like an instant sisterhood with people that you might not have anything in common with, but it's just the great equalizer in that it instantly bonds people.
And raising awareness, making sure those impacted by infertility know that they have people with similar experience in their corner.
It can be a very isolating process, so it's really helpful for people to know that they're not alone.
The organization opening arms and doors for those dealing with this common struggle. Infertility is defined as not being able to get pregnant after a year or longer of unprotected sex. According to the World Health Organization, about 17.5% of the population, it's roughly 1 in 6 people worldwide, will experience infertility. To go more in depth about the causes and what people can do to help them get pregnant, I spoke with a specialist in the field with UPMC. And we are joined this morning by Dr. Joseph Sanfilippo, Vice Chairman of Reproductive Sciences with UPMC, and also Professor of OBGYN Reproductive Sciences, and also a new title we can add to your resume, author of the book, The Expert Guide to Fertility, which just came out within the past few months. Thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you, Kelly.
After reading through your book, and based on your decades of experience, it's really amazing how much essentially can go wrong when it comes to fertility on both the male side and the female side. Is this surprising to a lot of people?
Yes. The key thing is, let's start with the egg. The egg has a very short window, 12, maybe 24 hours when it can be fertilized. When couples are trying to get pregnant, it's important, for instance, if you're using an ovulation predictor kit, to have intercourse like 3 days in a row or every other day right around ovulation. The goal is once the egg is released, we want sperm at the end of the fallopian tube. So fertilization occurs at the end of the fallopian tube. It then rolls into the uterus, and the next part is the lining of the uterus and implantation. So all of these factors have to be, in good working order. And then there are so many other aspects to think about. What about a woman's health, medical problems, etc.? Lifestyle becomes so important, diet and exercise. It's a great idea to be taking prenatal vitamins that have folic acid, at least 0.4 milligrams, and you take those even several months before you plan to get pregnant. And these are some of the really important aspects.
That's what I was going to ask you, and I know they are included in your book. Some things people can do as they start approaching the conversation of potentially having a baby.
Well, the best advice is called preconception counseling. So that would be ideally, and a woman goes to her healthcare provider, could be a doctor, could be a physician assistant, a nurse practitioner, a midwife, and says, I want to get pregnant. Now, that counseling will include, again, lifestyle, diet, exercise, vitamins, nutrition, immunizations are important, and if you have medical problems, they should be addressed. The diabetic knows about hemoglobin A1C. That should be in a more ideal range. So all of these factors should be addressed ahead of time to get the best outcome.
Do you feel that infertility is on the rise, and if so, why?
There is no question. And I think in this day and age, appropriately, a woman is very career focused, and that kind of takes priority. And then I'll give you an example. I saw a patient just this past week, 43 years old, and she's been trying to get pregnant for 1 year, and says, well, why isn't it happening? Well, there's so many aspects. Number one, the most important thing is age of the egg in the ovary. The longer it's there, the more the problem. Okay, the genetics doesn't work as well as it did when she was in her 30s. And the other important aspect is what we call advanced maternal age. It's a term I really don't like, but we have to live with it. And it means over 35 years of age. That woman has a greater chance of developing diabetes during pregnancy, of developing high blood pressure, problems with labor and delivery. All of these things need to be considered. So if there is the scenario of, well, I don't have a male partner right now, a woman should consider freezing her eggs. Eggs freeze real well, and when she's ready to get pregnant, well, then she has the eggs where the clock has stopped at the age they were frozen.
There are, to that point, plenty of resources available for people in 2024. I know for a couple struggling, IVF seems to be the gold standard. For people at home who are unfamiliar with that process, can you walk us through that?
Sure. In vitro fertilization, actually it dates back to 1978. Edwards and Steptoe were the pioneers. Actually, I had the opportunity to be at a national convention where they presented information about the first IVF baby. There was a standing ovation from all of the physicians. I mean, what an accomplishment. So here we are in 2024. There are 8 million IVF babies. It's unbelievable where now we can provide for couples with unexplained infertility, low sperm count, low egg count, other particular problems where it hasn't worked, the opportunity to have their own child. And to me, that's probably one of the most exciting things that we can offer patients. I was thinking on the way over, you know, you see these signs, you see something, say something. Well, the point is, if you can't get pregnant, say something, okay? The sooner you say something, the better. Okay, because there's so much we can offer patients. The problem is when you come in at 43, your options are not good. Okay, if you would have come in at 33 or even 40, you have a better chance of success.
You know, I wanted to ask you that too. What is the best part about your job?
The best part about my job is patients and providing for them. You know, as medical students, we take a Hippocratic oath. And it's a very important thing that at the end of that oath, the patient comes first, and that's what we're here for. So I would say that is important. And it's a special thing, like 10 years later, I still get a Christmas card from the patient telling me what their children now are doing. That's special. And the other thing is teaching. I really enjoy medical students and residents, and we talk about women's health, and I see that light bulb going off. That's exciting. And perhaps the most important thing is what we call fellowship training. Now, these are individuals who have gone through medical school, 4 years OBGYN residency, and now spend 3 years just to learn infertility. Reproductive endocrinology and fertility is the specialty. And then they carry the banner, now I would say all over the country. And that to me is really important. It's a privilege to be a doctor. And I take that very seriously. And again, the patient comes first is an important thing for me.
Still ahead.
One of our primary tenets is to really help bring people together in community so that they don't feel like they're alone and they're only one going through challenge.
The local group embracing a bond to create a community of support. Welcome back. Unfortunately, many people who deal with infertility feel a sense of shame about it. They feel isolated and alone in their struggles, but they don't have to. I spoke with a local group that has created a community, a sisterhood of people who have walked in these shoes and have those shared experiences. For people who are unfamiliar, talk to us about Connected Nest, which it sounds like part of it is offering support for people who are experiencing infertility.
Yes,
Connected Nest is a new area nonprofit, and our entire mission is to support those on the journey to and through parenthood. And so we originated just within the past year, and our programs have been around a little bit longer in the area, but we have three main programs. We have the Facing Fertility program, which does support those who are going through infertility. And then we have the Empowering Moms program, which is for postpartum support for those who are in the first couple of years of raising babies. And then we have Equipping Parents, which provides parenting support ongoingly.
What is the why behind this? What is the reason for your mission?
So it actually stems from my own personal journey with infertility. I found myself just so isolated, feeling so alone in my grief, and not really being able to open up to friends and family who presented as very fertile. And I, through sitting in the waiting rooms at infertility clinics, was just staring at our feet and sitting across from women with tears in their eyes and couples holding hands while the woman squirmed with a full bladder before going into the OR to hopefully conceive their child. And just nobody was talking about it, just all of these elements in the waiting room, and just looking around feeling like, oh, I'm so alone, yet there's all these people sitting across from me and nobody's talking about it. Mm-hmm. And with my skill set as a mental health counselor, I felt like there's nothing in our community to support people going through infertility. I also have a need, and so I'm just gonna start it. And so that's kind of where it all came from. And it had very humble beginnings, just a very small group, and it's sort of grown into what it is today.
What have you seen the benefit is from people getting together and talking about it?
Yeah, so it's such a beautiful way for people to just let their guard down and speak openly and honestly with other people who get what they're going through. It can be such a difficult task to try to explain infertility treatments and this invisible grief that people are going through, just layers and upon layers of compounding grief. And I think infertility is very widely misunderstood and very prone to judgment sometimes. And sometimes it's easier just to keep it to yourself and not talk about it and quietly, slip away and do injections or go to your appointments and not share about it with others. But allowing people to come into a group setting with other people who get it, you really find like an instant sisterhood with people that you might not have anything in common with, but it's just the great equalizer in that it instantly bonds people. And we joke about it being, the club that nobody wants to be a part of. I usually tell group members when they show up, I know that you don't want to be here. Mm-hmm. Nobody does want to be here, but they find just such relief being able to speak openly and honestly with people who understand everything that they're going through, because they're also going through the same journey.
Mm-hmm. Where can people go? You said it's community to community, right?
Right. So one of our missions with Connected Nest is to really provide these supports that help to bridge the gap between nothing and clinical spaces, and to really bring people together in these community spaces. So we have multiple areas that we are meeting right now, and our goal is to continue to expand those locations. Gotcha. So right now we have groups that meet in Zelienople, Mars, Bellevue, and we try to make sure that we can really reach people and encourage people to come to a safe and community neutral space as opposed to the overwhelm of clinical spaces.
Right. I was going to ask you that, if there is a virtual element for people who maybe have a crazy work schedule or something going on that would prevent them from driving there.
Yeah, that was something that we were able to add within the past couple of years through some grant funding, and that was really truly when Alicia and I started to work together, because I was seeing a need in the women who were already coming through postpartum support groups, through Empowering Moms, that still were going back into infertility treatments for secondary infertility. So Alicia started facilitating secondary infertility within the past couple of years, and that was online.
Yeah, that secondary population of infertility has such unique challenges in that those triggers are really woven into everyday parts of their life. And it can be even more isolating in a way because you don't necessarily fit in with the mom category because you're still in that infertility category, but you don't fully fit into the infertility category either. So this subgroup is really unique, and by offering it online, people all over the nation can join and overcome those challenges and hurdles that it would take to get to an in-person group. And it just really bridges a wider community of people that find great relief when they are able to talk to other moms facing those same unique struggles.
I want to ask you guys this in closing. From what I'm gathering from diving into this topic, so much of this is about keeping hope. What kind of message of hope do you want to give people here in Pittsburgh who may be experiencing infertility?
Yes, so hope is such a loaded word because it's both a pain and a comfort. And it's so hard to maintain hope when you're experiencing compounding loss, layers of loss, one after the other. And it can also feel just like counterintuitive to hold on to that hope. And that is a battle that we face with during groups. I always tell group members they might leave feeling worse sometimes than when they came in, especially if they're first-time attenders, because they're resurfacing all of that grief. But I think it's knowledge, in a sense, is power. And I think by them getting educated on the fact that infertility treatment is a process and it's normal for it not to work the first time, and just being armed with that education of what treatment looks like and how it tends to take some time for doctors to figure out what works, and that nothing is a waste. Every failed cycle, every treatment and test result is just points of data, and that's what infertility medicine is. It's all about collecting data to point you in the right direction, which is to find a child. And also, I think spirituality, leading on that and leaning on a greater purpose that you have beyond being a parent and taking some of that pressure off that you do have value outside of this, and feeling that value and feeling that purpose and in your identity and sort of reshaping that is a way to hold on to hope too.
Anything?
Yeah, and in Connected Nest, one of our primary tenets is to really help bring people together in community so that they don't feel like they're alone and they're only one going through challenges at any stage that they're in, so that they can feel surrounded by others and have that open conversation about those struggles in a safe and accepting space, which is one of the primary things with us being mental health therapists, that we continue to want to open up those spaces for those tough conversations and those big feelings, and really help build the bridges that people need in this time.
Still ahead.
It's really important to have members of this community, members of the community come together and support each other and interact.
The local organization that recently held a walk to raise awareness about infertility. Welcome back. Raising awareness about infertility and educating more people about the options they have. That's part of the mission behind Resolve, the National Infertility Association. I sat down with a woman who helped organize one of its recent events here in Pittsburgh about the importance of having resources. We're joined now by Jessica Manns, the co-chair of Pittsburgh Walk of Hope, which is through the organization Resolve. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having me.
For people who are unfamiliar with Resolve, can you tell us a little bit about the organization and how it's helping people experiencing infertility?
Resolve is the National Infertility Association, and it's a national nonprofit organization that provides a lot of great resources for those experiencing infertility. So some of the main things that they do is they provide free educational resources and they also provide community support in terms of things like the Walk of Hope. They also provide support groups for those with infertility, both virtual and in person, and those can be both professional and peer-led groups. They also are very big about advocating right now for fertility access for everyone who needs it.
You know, we were just talking with the doctor about all of these options, certainly not covered by insurance in all states. That's going to put a huge financial burden on a lot of families. Is that kind of where Resolve can step in and help people find access to those resources financially to be able to help?
Definitely. So although Resolve doesn't have its own grant, it actually has one of its resources is all of the grants that are currently available. And again, they're continuously advocating for more accessible fertility care for everyone. And I think a lot of that is also trying to make it more affordable for people because it is very expensive.
And you talk about these support groups too. I imagine just feeling not alone in going through this would be really important for people.
Absolutely. And I think that's the primary focus of the walk is bringing together a local community and letting people know that they are not alone in their journeys. As we know, 1 in 6 people worldwide will experience infertility in their lifetime. And because of that, it's very common, more common than we previously believed. So it's really important to have members of the community come together and support each other and interact. And it can be a very isolating process. So it's really helpful for people to know that they're not alone.
Just last week, we had the walk, Pittsburgh's first ever. How meaningful is it for you to see people coming out in the community and showing up in this way?
It's so meaningful. It means it was so rewarding, and it's just so meaningful to me. Working as an embryologist, I see firsthand how many people are affected by infertility and how it affects their lives. Knowing people personally who've gone through it and seeing how it affects their relationships and just themselves.
Is this something that you hope to continue in the future?
Absolutely, definitely. This is the first of many.
You're watching For the Record. We're back right after this. Welcome back. If you have a topic that you would like us to address, send us an email to news@WTAE.com. Also, you can rewatch this episode or any episode on the Very Local app on your smartphone, tablet, or smart TV. Thanks so much for joining us. Have a great week, everyone.